Vulnerability is one of the most attractive traits a man can display. But when he gets it wrong, he simply comes across as whiny and needy. But so many men have the wrong conception around what vulnerability is. They see it as weakness. But this couldn't be further from the truth. Think about a fireman who runs into a burning building to go save a kid. There's a ton of vulnerability involved because that doesn't sound safe at all. He's putting himself at risk to help someone else that is incredibly vulnerable. Or someone performing on stage in front of a load of people. Once again, this is just vulnerable, putting yourself out there. Or even one of the most attractive things people always talk about. Someone that stands up straight with their sort of chest pressed out, looking straight forward. They look at that guy and they say he's attractive. But what is he doing? He's making himself more vulnerable. He's exposing his chest to the world where all of our vital organs are. Or even in a really simple case, maybe you decide to express something to someone that you've hidden from the world and never shown before. That's vulnerable, and it is attractive because it's brave. It's so courageous, and we just get this all wrong, thinking that what we need to do is hide who we are, that it's always weakness to show your flaws. And fundamentally, that is wrong. But as I say, people can then go too far the other way. They can then start to do vulnerability vomit, telling the guy that they're sat next to on the bus all their deepest, darkest secrets. And that is wrong. And it isn't. It kind of bastardizes vulnerability. It's just not the right way to go about it. So, in this video, I'm going to break down how you can learn to express yourself in a vulnerable, courageous manner, which will instantly help you in your relationships with girls and in your relationships in general. Because once you can master vulnerability, people connect to you. They feel like you're real, and it encourages them to want to be vulnerable around you as well. My name's Andrew Wilkinson, and I am a dating and relationship coach, and I help guys from all over the world master their ability to be vulnerable in a confident fashion, meet the girl they want to date, and have amazing relationships. So, let's get to the first point in vulnerability, and that is overcoming your fear around it. One of the reasons that maybe you're not being that vulnerable is that when you were growing up, perhaps you were bullied for the things that made you different. Those things you're now hiding about yourself and that you hate and you repress. Maybe it's because, when you grew up, everyone was picking on you for those things. It's I was certainly picked on. I was an absolute loser and I hit puberty seriously late. And because of that, I was picked on for how I looked. And that made me carry that into my early 20s, that I felt that if I showed who I really was, then all the world would do is reject it. But the thing is, your teenage years aren't reflective of real life. That the people that were going around bullying others in school were doing that because it was to hide their own insecurities about how they felt about themselves. If they could make you feel bad, it could take the pressure off them. And it sets up this awful pattern. Vulnerability is not something that you should be terrified of. And when you do it in adult life, unless you're around absolute juvenile people, they're not going to react to you in that way. This fear that if you show part of your flaw, part of yourself, people might use it against you, then all you'll do is hide yourself for the rest of your life and you'll never have any real relationships. And that's the thing. It does come with a risk. Because you don't actually know. Maybe you could tell someone something about yourself and something happens in the relationship and then they do use it against you. Well, anything worth having in this life comes with a risk, and that's the point of vulnerability. You're opening yourself up, and it takes a little bit of nuance here. As I say, share a little part of yourself with someone and see how that goes. Don't go all in with your darkest fears immediately to someone, even if you are really connected to them. Test out to see if you can feel like you can build that trust together. Then, after that, after you've overcome the fear of your vulnerability, then it's starting to look at the intent. And this is where the big difference comes in of those two people, the one that decides to go around sharing all these things about themselves, claiming it's vulnerability, when it in fact isn't. Someone that is just there posting their deepest, darkest thoughts on social media to garner attention. It isn't to show who they are with close friends they're comfortable with, and so they get to really see who you are. Instead, it's projecting this into the world en masse, on the internet, just to get attention, to feel validation. And that's wrong, and it's icky, and we can all feel it. It's why those weird rants on Facebook of someone that just goes off on one about their mental health, and it's cool expressing yourself, but this just isn't the right domain for it, and that's what makes it icky. Are you trying to express yourself, or are you trying to manipulate others into giving you sympathy? Really identify what are you doing, because it's easy to fall into that trap. It's comforting to think that you can just be like, oh, well, I'll just go get a load of sympathy. But that isn't what we're trying to do here. The intent you're after is showing who you really are with those closest to you, so they can understand you. Because it's one of the things that we want most in the world, is to be surrounded by people that truly know us. And it's a sign of respect to another, and a sign of the relationship that you're starting to let them in. If you never let people in, you never let people see who you are, and you aren't willing to be vulnerable and show it, the relationship will crumble, because it won't be that strong. It will be a fragile relationship that can break because there's nothing keeping you together. Those relationships of vulnerability are what help you through the difficult times. I should know this. I was not vulnerable at all in my first relationship. I hid all of the parts about myself that I didn't want her to see, because I didn't want her to see me as anything other than perfect. And then what happened? As soon as we encountered some difficult challenges in the relationship, it broke down, because there was nothing real about what was happening between us. It was like I'd created an image for her to connect to, not the real me. So identify what your intent is when you're sharing. Is it to be manipulative, or is it to establish a connection with someone close to you? Then look at how you're communicating it, because I think everyone might have sat there in that uncomfortable time where someone might have been saying something to you, but the way they went about it, their tone of voice, it was almost like they were a victim to the world of everything that they've gone through, and there was no ownership of it. Being vulnerable is being able to show who you are, but not expecting something in return. It's just letting someone in, and you can tell that by how they communicate it. It's if they tell you about growing up, as I say, I was at school and I was bullied and it was not good. It really, it hurt me and it changed me. But I own that. That isn't me telling you that you now need to do something about it. It's just me showing you who I am. And that's the difference. It's how are you communicating this story? How are you talking about yourself? Is it from a position of utter shambolic weakness, or is it just from a position of ownership? Being a victim in any scenario doesn't help you, but it's especially bad when it comes to being vulnerable. I'd also mention, don't be over eager to justify it, which is more of a nuanced trap and a little step up, but is also something that I've seen people do, that maybe they'll have something bad happen to them. Whatever it is, it's a parent's divorce, it's being bullied, it's being overweight, whatever your individual insecurity is, but then they'll immediately, but this is what made me, I wouldn't be the same without it. And it's that attempt to cover it up so far that there's this underlying belief that's being communicated that you can't have the flaw, and simply just have a flaw. That you need to be perfect, you need to be seen as perfect. When you show these sides of yourself, Like, all the insecurities, why not? Why not go for this one? Like, the first few girls I ever went back with, I failed to perform on all of them, and it was a disaster. It was awkward as hell. They felt bad, I felt bad, and it was a really awful experience. But when I tell people about that, it's not to then make them sort of cry over me, and the intent behind it and how I'm communicating it is in a different fashion. It isn't then I suddenly now need to be like, oh, but I'm a massive Chad now. I have friggin' slept with all these hundreds of girls. No. It's like, yeah, I absolutely failed at that. And it was embarrassing and not something I'm particularly proud of. And that's it. I don't need the thing to be like, oh, but all this kind of thing. It's just a part of you that didn't work out that well, because you are human and you're allowed flaws. And do you know what happens when you're able to communicate like this? Other people feel like they can start to maybe reveal a bit more of themselves and show a bit more of where they're not all that, where they're not perfect. And when people do that, and when you invite that kind of communication with others, they find it amazing, especially in the confines of a relationship. They love it because we don't value relationships based on how well we know the other person. The value of a relationship, we judge it based on how well they know us. So you will find people out in the world that have never shared who they really are. And then they come across this person that's willing to be vulnerable, that's willing to be open, and it almost encourages that out of them, something they've never done before. So suddenly they're like, oh my God, this person's great. And if you can have that relationship with someone, with a girl, they will love that and they will feel genuinely connected to you. But it all comes from an honest place of you not being terrified to show who you really are. And I've spoken pretty heavily here on vulnerability in reference to being able to sort of talk about yourself and show yourself. But vulnerability can be an act. It can just mean that you're willing to do things that might be perceived negatively just because they resonate with you. Like, an easy example for me is with the girl I'm currently dating. I think it was like date 2 or 3. We were driving in the car and Call Me Maybe came on, and I literally went beat for beat, lyric for lyric, sung the entire thing just because I was in the mood for it. And you know what? That was hella vulnerable because it's a weird ass thing to do, but it's an expression of me because Call Me Maybe is my karaoke song. And I was willing to embarrass myself doing that because for me it's real. Like, that's a song that means something to me, it seems. So you can be vulnerable in the way you act, and it's just by being willing to show who you really are. I don't know that she even likes the song, but she was probably alright with the fact that I was confident enough to do that. And that's what it takes to do the act of vulnerability, and it's attractive in the sense that you're willing to be confident, you're willing to fail. People adore someone who is willing to put themselves out there to be the person in the arena. So if you're concerned that no one really knows you, you struggle to connect with people, learning the nuance of how to be vulnerable around others, and as I say, not the vulnerability vomit, telling everyone about your relationship with your mum that's terrible, or the relationship with your dad, whatever it is, but just actually being confident that, yeah, you are a fully rounded person that has flaws, that has strengths, because that's the thing, when you're willing to be vulnerable and show your weaknesses, people really attach themselves to your strengths because they believe them. You're not really painting this image of, I'm so perfect. So if you show your flaws, when you talk about your strengths, people actually engage and are impressed with them because they know they're real, because they trust you. And that's what vulnerability does. It builds trust and it builds attraction. However, there's one emotion that is the enemy of vulnerability, and it's the one that haunted me. It was the one that ruined my life through my teens and early 20s. It's what led me to wanting to hide myself in that early relationship. And this emotion will ruin every relationship you ever have in your entire life, and is the thing that if you can't get over it, you will always regret it. It will leave you miserable to your last days. So, if you want to see what that emotion is that is going to get in your way, check out this video here. And that's why I break down in my favourite video on the channel why it's so deadly and why it's so necessary to overcome, especially if you want to unlock the power of authentic vulnerability.